The rain in San Francisco didn't fall softly that afternoon. It slashed. It tore through the air in quick, angry sheets that turned every street corner into a mirror of gray. And somewhere between Market and 6th, a man sat on the curb, his clothes soaked, his shoes long past the point of keeping anything dry. His name was Malcolm Reed. People passed by him the way they passed by a trash can, noticing, but not really seeing. His saxophone case lay open in front of him, half filled with water and a few crumpled bills that looked more like pity than money. He raised the saxophone to his lips anyway. The instrument was old, dented, and missing part of its mouthpiece. But when he played, even the rain seemed to pause. The sound was raw and cracked, like his voice would have been if anyone ever stopped to listen. Across the street, a black limousine idled by the curb. Inside, a little girl sat by the window, maybe 9 years old, pale face, frail arms. Her legs were strapped into braces beneath a pink blanket. Her eyes had the dull look of someone who'd stopped expecting anything new from life. Malcolm noticed her first. Not because she was rich. He didn't see that. What he saw was the sadness, the kind that never really leaves. He started playing something different, softer, warmer. A tune he once played for his own daughter when she couldn't sleep. Then something unexpected happened. He stood up right there in the rain and began to dance. Not well, not gracefully, but joyfully. His movements were awkward and silly, like a man who'd forgotten the rules of the world and decided to make his own. At first the girl only stared. Then, slowly, her lips trembled, and she laughed. A small, broken sound at first, but then a real laugh. Inside the limousine, her father turned, startled. He hadn't heard that sound in months, maybe years. The bodyguard stepped out immediately. "Hey, move along!" he barked. Malcolm froze. The music stopped mid-note. He gave the little girl a shy smile and a small bow, as if finishing a performance no one asked for. "Sorry, sir," he said softly. "Just wanted to see her smile." He picked up his case and began to walk away, the rain washing over his back. The girl pressed her small hand against the window, watching him disappear behind a wall of water. In the front seat, Charles Warren, one of the wealthiest men in California, sat in silence. He had built companies, bought islands, crushed competitors. But right then, he couldn't stop staring at his daughter, at her glowing face reflected in the glass. When the light turned green, the car rolled forward, leaving behind the man who'd given him something no amount of money could buy: the sound of his child's laughter. That night, Malcolm sat under a bridge where the wind howled like a wounded dog. He opened a small tin can filled with a few coins and rainwater. He didn't care. For the first time in a long while he felt alive. He closed his eyes and whispered, "You saw that, didn't you, baby girl?" He took a worn photograph from his pocket, a picture of a smiling child with pigtails. His daughter, gone for years now. "Made another one smile today," he murmured. "You'd be proud." The rain fell harder. The city lights flickered across the puddles. Somewhere far away, the limousine pulled into a gated mansion, its driveway lined with palm trees and security cameras. Inside, Lily Warren sat in her chair, still smiling faintly. She whispered to the empty room, "He was funny." Her father, standing by the door, heard her. He froze. The last time she'd said that, the last time she'd laughed at all, was before the accident. Later that night, he opened his laptop in his study. His inbox was full of unread messages, meetings, contracts. But instead, he opened the security footage from the car's dash cam. He watched the soaked man play his saxophone, watched him dance in the rain. And when he saw his daughter's reflection in the window, smiling, eyes bright and alive, something inside him cracked. He didn't know the man's name, didn't know his story. But one thought wouldn't leave his mind. Why did it take a stranger from the street to bring my daughter back to life? Outside, under the overpass, Malcolm lay down, clutching the photograph against his chest. The sound of rain on metal pipes echoed like applause fading into the night. He smiled to himself, just a tired, broken smile, and whispered, "Tomorrow I'll play again." Morning came with the dull hum of traffic above the bridge. The city woke up restless, impatient, people rushing toward somewhere, always somewhere. But down below, among cardboard boxes and rusted pipes, Malcolm Reed woke to the sound of seagulls fighting over trash. He sat up slowly, his back aching. Around him were the others, the quiet ghosts of the city. An old veteran who talked in his sleep, a woman with tangled hair mumbling prayers, a young man wrapped in garbage bags. They all shared the same kingdom of concrete, where yesterday and tomorrow felt the same. Malcolm rubbed his hands together for warmth, then reached for his saxophone case. He wiped the water off it with his sleeve, careful like someone handling a relic. To him, it was a relic, the last thing he owned that still had a heartbeat. Once, years ago, this same man had played in front of hundreds. He'd worn clean suits, slick shoes, and had a crowd that actually listened. Back then, people used to call him Magic Reed. He'd lived in New Orleans in a small yellow house on Burgundy Street. His wife, Denise, loved to paint while he played. Their daughter, Amara, would twirl in the living room like a tiny dancer, her curls bouncing, her giggles blending with the saxophone's tune. Those were the golden days, when every note he played felt like sunlight. But golden days don't last. Not when a man starts believing he's untouchable. The gigs started paying less. Malcolm began drinking just to take the edge off. Then the shows became sloppy. Denise begged him to slow down, to take a break. But music was all he knew. Music, and the bottle that made him forget how much he'd started to hate himself. The night everything burned was ordinary at first. A small gig at a bar off St. Claude Avenue, a few drunk tourists, tips barely enough for gas money. He came home late, half drunk, cigarette in hand. Denise was asleep. Amara was in her room, her teddy bear tucked under her arm. He remembered the flick of the lighter, the orange glow. He remembered falling asleep on the couch. And he remembered the scream, that high, piercing scream that still cut through his dreams even now. By the time he woke, the smoke was everywhere. He crawled toward the hallway shouting her name. He couldn't reach her room. The fire moved too fast. The air was poison. His lungs gave up before his legs did. When he woke in the hospital, Amara was gone. Denise was gone. Everything was gone. For months he tried to keep playing. The notes came out cracked and lifeless, like he was choking on them. He sold everything except the saxophone. The gigs stopped coming. Friends stopped calling. And eventually, the streets welcomed him. Now, sitting under the bridge, Malcolm lifted the saxophone again and blew a few notes into the morning air. It sounded different these days, like grief turned into sound. But sometimes, when he closed his eyes, he could almost hear Amara laughing again. A voice broke through his thoughts. "Yo, old man, you playing again today?" It was Kenny, a kid barely 20, who'd been on the street since 16. "Yeah," Malcolm said, "gotta earn my breakfast." Kenny smirked. "You should play that same song from yesterday, the one that made that little rich girl smile. People were talking about it at the shelter." Malcolm frowned. "What rich girl?" Kenny shrugged. "Guess someone filmed you, man. Said it's all over TikTok or whatever." Malcolm laughed, a rough, dry sound. "TikTok, huh? Maybe I'm famous again." He didn't believe it, of course. Out here, fame meant nothing. It didn't buy food or warmth or forgiveness. Still, when he walked back to Market Street that afternoon, part of him hoped to see that same black car. Maybe the girl would be there again. Maybe she'd smile one more time. She wasn't. He stood there anyway, playing for strangers who didn't stop, didn't listen, didn't care. A few coins clinked into his case, the sound of brief pity. He played until the sun went down, and when he finally packed up, his hands trembled from exhaustion. As he turned to leave, he saw a reflection in the darkened window of a cafe. Not the crowd, not the cars, just himself. A man who once had everything, now reduced to echoes and pavement. He touched the photo in his pocket. The edges were worn, the colors faded. His daughter's eyes smiled up at him from a different world. "I'm still here," he whispered. "Still playing, baby girl." The city lights blinked on, one by one, like silent witnesses to the man everyone passed by, except one little girl who had seen him not as a beggar, but as something he'd forgotten he could be, a person who made someone happy. The Warren estate sat high on a hill overlooking the fog-covered bay, a mansion of glass and silence. Every surface shone, every movement was measured, like living inside a museum built to prove success. Inside, Lily Warren sat by the window of her enormous bedroom. The world outside looked like a painting, beautiful but unreachable. Her wheelchair was parked beside the glass, her small hands resting quietly on her knees. She could hear the distant hum of the city, horns, laughter, music, sounds that belonged to other people. She'd been in that chair for 2 years. The car accident had taken her mother and the use of her legs in one terrible second. Her father had survived, but he wasn't really there anymore, not in the way he used to be. Charles Warren was a man who built empires out of code and control. He ran 4 companies, owned private jets, and had more assistants than friends. In the beginning, after the crash, he tried to fix everything the only way he knew how, by spending money. He hired the best doctors, the best therapists, even a team of private educators, but none of them could fix the silence. Lily didn't laugh. She barely spoke. Every attempt at joy seemed to die in her throat before it reached her lips. Until yesterday. When she laughed in the car, really laughed, the sound startled everyone. Even the driver had looked back, shocked. For a brief second, Charles had seen the daughter he used to know, and when he saw the reason for it, a drenched, ragged man spinning in the rain with a battered saxophone, something twisted inside him. He hadn't been able to stop thinking about it. Who was that man? Why had he affected her like that? Now, as Lily sat by the window, she kept asking him the same question. "Daddy, can we see him again?" Charles closed his laptop. "Sweetheart, he's just a man on the street. You don't even know him." She looked down at her hands. He was kind. "I know," he said softly, "but people out there, they're not always safe." Lily's voice barely rose above a whisper. "He made me feel normal." That last word hit him harder than he expected. Normal. After she fell asleep, Charles wandered into his study. It was nearly midnight, but he couldn't focus on the spreadsheets in front of him. Instead, he opened the security feed from the car. There he was again, the same man, soaked through, dancing and playing like the world was something worth fighting for. The way Lily smiled at him, so alive, so effortless, made Charles's throat tighten. He clicked on another tab and typed, "Homeless man, saxophone, San Francisco." And there it was. The video had gone viral. 1 million views in less than a day. "Homeless man makes disabled girl smile," the headline read. In the comment section, people wrote things like, "Faith in humanity restored." "Someone find this guy? Give him a record deal." This broke me in the best way. Charles leaned back in his chair. For the first time in years, he didn't feel in control. The next morning during breakfast, Lily pushed away her plate. "Did you find him?" Charles hesitated. "Sweetheart, he's probably long gone." "You have people who find things all the time," she said. "Find him." He looked at her, really looked, the determination in her eyes, so much like her mother's, and he realized he couldn't say no. That afternoon he called his head of security. "I want you to find a street performer," he said. "Plays a saxophone downtown. He's homeless. Bring him to me, safely." Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Malcolm sat outside a cafe, watching the rain return. He didn't know that the same people who once walked past him without a glance were now scrolling through their phones, searching for his face. He only knew that the little girl had smiled, and that somehow that mattered. For the first time in years, He played without thinking about money. He played because someone had finally listened. Back at the mansion, Lily looked out the window again. The sky was gray, and the bay was wrapped in fog. But her reflection looked different now, brighter, alive. She whispered to herself, "He'll come back. I know he will." And somewhere downtown, Malcolm's saxophone echoed through the rain, as if answering her. By the time the second rainstorm rolled in, the video had already reached 10 million views. News anchors were talking about the mysterious street saxophonist who made a billionaire's daughter laugh. Morning shows replayed the clip in slow motion. The drenched man, the little girl's smile, the hand pressed to the limousine window. Everyone had something to say. Some called it a miracle of kindness. Others said it was proof that humanity isn't dead. Hashtags spread across every platform. The sax man, smile again, hope in the rain. But Malcolm didn't know any of it. He didn't have a phone or a computer. He barely had shoes that didn't leak. He still woke up under the bridge, still shared stale bread with Kenny, still played on the same corner he always did. Only now, the air felt different. People actually looked at him. Some even smiled. A woman dropped a $5 bill into his case and said, "You're the guy from the video, right?" Malcolm blinked. "What video?" She laughed. "You're famous, mister." He didn't know whether to feel proud or scared. Fame never did him any good before. It always came with expectations, and expectations always led to disappointment. Later that day, while playing outside a convenience store, two teenagers approached him with their phones out. "Hey man, play the song, the one from the clip." He tried to ignore them, but they kept filming, giggling. When he finally started playing, they cheered, not because of the music, but because of the novelty of it. After they left, Malcolm sighed. "The world loves you for a moment, then forgets you twice as fast," he muttered. Still, he couldn't shake the memory of the little girl's face. That was real, not a camera moment, not a hashtag, just real. Across town, in a mansion filled with screens and silence, Lily was watching that same video on her tablet over and over again. Each time she smiled at the same part. When he danced, slipping slightly, laughing at himself, she laughed too, clutching her blanket. Her nurse peeked in. "You really liked that video, huh?" Lily nodded. "He didn't care who was watching. He just wanted to make me happy." Her father heard that from the hallway. He stopped, hand resting on the doorframe, something heavy settling in his chest. He'd spent millions trying to make her happy. New therapies, tutors, even virtual reality sessions meant to rebuild neurological optimism. And yet, a man who owned nothing managed to give her joy with nothing more than a song. That night, Charles sat with his security chief again. "Any luck finding him?" "None yet, sir. We've checked the main areas where street musicians play, but he moves around. No ID, no records. It's like he doesn't exist." Charles frowned. "He exists. I saw him. Keep looking." Meanwhile, in the city's shelter district, Malcolm was huddled beside a fire barrel with Kenny and a few others. Kenny grinned, showing the screen of a cracked phone. "Man, look at this. You got fan pages now." Malcolm squinted. There it was, his soaked face, his crooked smile, thousands of comments. One said, "Someone get this man a home." Another, "He deserves better." For a brief moment, Malcolm felt warmth that wasn't from the fire. Maybe people weren't as cruel as he thought. Maybe this time, something good might come of it. He glanced up at the night sky, gray, endless. "Maybe she saw it too," he whispered. "Maybe she's smiling again." Days passed. Lily began asking her father every morning, "Did you find him yet?" And every morning he answered, "We're trying." She'd nod, then look back out the window, as if hoping the rain would carry him to her doorstep. One afternoon she said something that startled him. "Daddy, I don't think he's just some homeless man." He looked up from his laptop. "What do you mean?" She smiled faintly. "People look at him and see what he doesn't have. But I saw what he does have. He's free." Charles didn't know how to respond. Freedom was something he'd traded long ago for power, and power never made anyone smile. That night, after everyone went to bed, he sat in the dark with his laptop scrolling through videos, photos, comments. And then he saw a new upload, a short clip filmed just hours ago, Malcolm sitting on a corner playing the same tune again. Charles froze. The caption read, "He's back." He grabbed his phone. "I found him," he said. "Get the car." The next morning, as the city stirred awake, Malcolm stood beneath an awning, playing softly, while the first light broke through the fog. He didn't see the black limousine turning the corner, didn't notice the man inside, watching him through the tinted glass. The same man whose life he'd unknowingly changed. Charles Bennett sat in the back seat of his Bentley, staring out through the tinted window at the cold, gray morning. His assistant had told him there was a situation in the park, something about a homeless man drawing crowds near his daughter's daily walk. Normally, Charles would have ignored it. He didn't have time for trivial matters. But when his assistant mentioned the man's name had reached the tabloids and that his daughter, Emily, had laughed for the first time in months because of him, something inside Charles shifted. He didn't know why, but he wanted to see the man himself. When the car stopped near the park gates, Charles stepped out, his tailored coat catching the chill breeze. The park was quiet, except for a few pigeons and the faint hum of morning traffic. Then he saw him, Malcolm, standing near a bench, talking to the security guard who had once chased him away. The guard looked uneasy now, like he wasn't sure what to do with him. Malcolm's clothes were still ragged, his jacket too big for him, but there was a calm dignity in the way he stood. When he noticed Charles approaching, he straightened a little and took off his worn cap. "You must be Mr. Bennett," Malcolm said softly. Charles nodded. "You're the man who's been entertaining my daughter." Malcolm gave a small smile. "Didn't know she was your daughter, sir. I just saw a kid who looked like she needed to laugh." Charles studied him for a long moment. There was no arrogance in Malcolm's tone, no apology either, just quiet, sincerity. "She hasn't laughed like that in a long time," Charles admitted. "Since the accident, she's been different." "I'm sorry," Malcolm replied, lowering his eyes. "Kids don't deserve that kind of pain." They stood there in silence for a few seconds, two men from opposite worlds, both unsure what to say next. Then Charles gestured toward the bench. "Walk with me," he said. As they moved through the park, Charles asked questions, simple ones at first. "Where are you from?" "How long have you been out here?" Malcolm answered honestly. He told him about growing up in Georgia, about playing music in small clubs, about the factory job that vanished overnight when machines replaced men. He spoke of a marriage that fell apart and a son he hadn't seen in years. Charles listened quietly. He'd spent his life around people who talked for profit, investors, lawyers, politicians. But Malcolm spoke like a man with nothing left to gain. His words carried weight because they were free of calculation. At one point, Charles asked, "Why the singing, the dancing?" Malcolm chuckled softly. "Because it's what I still got. You can lose your job, your home, even your pride. But if you can still make someone smile, then maybe you ain't completely gone yet." That line hit Charles harder than he expected. Before leaving, he handed Malcolm a folded bill, a $100 note, but Malcolm shook his head. "I appreciate it, sir, but that ain't why I'm here." Charles hesitated. He wasn't used to being refused, but something about the man's quiet strength stopped him from insisting. "Then at least let me buy you lunch," he said finally. Malcolm smiled. "That I'll take." They went to a small cafe on the corner, a place Charles had probably driven by 1,000 times without noticing. Inside, Malcolm ate slowly, savoring each bite like it was the first real meal he'd had in weeks. Charles barely touched his food. He was too busy studying the man across from him. For the first time in years, Charles felt something human, something unpolished and real, sitting across from him in that modest diner. When they stepped back outside, Charles said quietly, "You made my daughter happy. That means more than you know." Malcolm smiled and nodded. "She's a good kid. You should see how she looks at you when you're not paying attention." Charles blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" Malcolm shrugged. "Just saying. She loves you, man. Don't forget that." The billionaire stood there in silence, watching Malcolm walk back toward the park, a thin, tired man disappearing into the gray morning light. For some reason, Charles felt smaller than usual. As his driver pulled up, Charles said one quiet thing to himself before stepping inside the car. "I'm not done with him yet." He didn't know what that meant exactly, but deep down, he felt this was only the beginning. The next morning, Charles Bennett stood by the window of his penthouse, staring at the skyline. The city looked peaceful from above, all glass and order. But somewhere below, the man he'd met yesterday was probably waking up on a bench, wrapping himself tighter in that old coat. Charles couldn't stop thinking about him. There was something in Malcolm's eyes, not pity, not desperation, but a quiet sort of honesty Charles hadn't seen in years. It bothered him. It intrigued him. It made him feel guilty for reasons he didn't fully understand. He picked up his phone and made a call. "Find him," he said simply. By noon, his assistant had located Malcolm near the same park. When the black sedan pulled up beside him, Malcolm looked almost amused. "Didn't think you'd come back," he said when Charles stepped out. "I don't like leaving things unfinished," Charles replied. "Come with me. I have a proposal." Malcolm hesitated for a moment, then followed. They drove in silence. Malcolm looked out the window at the tall buildings, the endless movement of people. He seemed calm, but Charles could sense the unease behind his eyes, the feeling of being out of place in a world that had forgotten him. When they arrived at the Bennett's private estate, Malcolm froze. The house looked like something out of another planet, all marble and glass, with a garden larger than most city blocks. Charles led him inside. Emily was in the living room, watching cartoons with her nurse beside her. When she saw Malcolm, her face lit up. "Mr. Malcolm," she said, her voice full of joy. He smiled and waved. "Hey, sunshine. You remember me?" She nodded eagerly, her wheelchair turning slightly toward him. Charles watched the exchange in silence. That one smile, that unguarded, pure reaction, was something he hadn't been able to get from his daughter in months of therapy and doctors. When Emily's nurse wheeled her into the garden, Charles turned to Malcolm. "I want to hire you," he said bluntly. Malcolm blinked. "Hire me? For what, sir?" "To spend time with my daughter, make her laugh, keep her company. Whatever it is you did yesterday, do it again, every day if you can." Malcolm frowned slightly. "I'm no clown, Mr. Bennett." Charles stiffened. "I didn't mean it that way. You made her happy. And I'd like to make sure she stays that way." Malcolm was quiet for a long moment, then asked softly, "Why me?" Charles hesitated before answering. "Because she listens to you. She sees something in you she doesn't see in anyone else. Maybe I do too." Malcolm gave a slow nod. "All right, but I don't want your money unless I earn it proper. Let me help her, but don't make me a pet project, okay?" Charles's expression softened. "Fair enough." From that day forward, Malcolm began coming to the estate every afternoon. At first, Emily's nurse was skeptical, but soon even she couldn't deny the difference. Malcolm would tell stories, some funny, some sad, about his life on the road, about the music he used to play, about little moments that made him feel alive again. He sang to her sometimes, too, old blues songs that Charles had never heard before. Emily would laugh and clap along, her face glowing with a joy that had long been missing. And every day when Malcolm left, Charles found himself standing by the window, watching the old man walk down the driveway, slower than most, but with a kind of grace that didn't belong to his world of numbers and contracts. One evening, after Emily had gone to bed, Charles joined Malcolm outside. The man was sitting on the steps, tuning a cheap guitar Charles had found in storage for him. "You play well," Charles said. Malcolm smiled faintly. "Used to. Hands are rustier now." They sat in silence for a moment before Charles spoke again. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Why did you end up on the street?" Malcolm looked at the stars for a while before answering. "Lost a lot of things, sir. Some my fault, some just life. When my wife died, I started drinking. When the job stopped, I gave up looking. After a while, it just got easier not to care. But then your girl smiled at me, and I remembered what it felt like to matter." Charles didn't know what to say. He just nodded slowly, feeling the weight of those words sink in. Later that night, after Malcolm had left, Charles went to check on Emily. She was asleep, her face peaceful, in a way he hadn't seen in years. He sat beside her bed and whispered quietly, "Thank you, Malcolm." He didn't know that at that very same moment, Malcolm was walking through the quiet streets of the city, humming one of his old songs, and smiling for the first time in a long, long while. By late autumn, everyone in the Bennett estate knew about Malcolm. The guards greeted him politely, the staff whispered as he passed, and the tabloids, well, they'd already begun spinning their stories. Billionaire's daughter befriends street musician. Mysterious homeless man seen visiting Bennett Mansion daily. Charles had tried to keep it quiet, but secrets never lasted long in his world. Investors called him. Journalists waited outside his office. His board members hinted that his personal decisions were becoming a distraction. He told them all to mind their business, but deep down he was afraid. One evening he found Malcolm sitting in the garden with Emily. She was laughing again, her voice carrying through the cold air like a melody. Malcolm was teaching her to strum a few chords on his guitar, and she looked freer than ever. But when Charles stepped closer, Malcolm noticed the stiffness in his expression. "What's wrong?" he asked. "People are talking," Charles said quietly. "They're saying things I don't like." Malcolm sighed. "Let them talk, sir. They don't know her. They don't know me." "I know," Charles replied, "but they think you're here for something else, for money, or—" He stopped himself. Malcolm's jaw tightened. "You think that too?" Charles hesitated. "No, but you have to understand how this looks." Malcolm stood up slowly, hurt flickering in his eyes. "All I did was care for that girl. You brought me here, remember?" "I did," Charles admitted, "and I'm grateful. But the world doesn't see kindness without suspicion." Emily, sitting quietly between them, looked confused. "Daddy? What's happening?" Charles forced a smile. "Nothing, sweetheart. Go inside. It's cold." She didn't move. "Don't be mad at Mr. Malcolm." He crouched beside her, his voice soft. "I'm not mad, Pumpkin. I just need to think." But when she finally went in, the silence between the two men felt heavy. Malcolm looked down at his worn shoes. "You know, I've been called worse things in my life. Thief, drunk, waste of space. But I never thought I'd have to defend myself for caring." Charles exhaled sharply. "You don't understand my position." "I understand plenty," Malcolm interrupted. "You're a man who's afraid of what people think. I used to be one too. Look where that got me." He turned to leave, but Charles grabbed his arm. "Don't walk away from me." Malcolm looked him straight in the eye. "Then stop treating me like one of your employees." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Malcolm gently pulled his arm free and walked out of the gate. Charles watched him disappear into the dark, the sound of his footsteps fading against the stone. That night, Emily refused to eat. When her father asked what was wrong, she said only one thing: "You hurt him." Charles didn't sleep. The house felt emptier than it had in years. Every laugh Emily had shared with Malcolm replayed in his head, reminders of something pure that he had managed to break. A few days later, Charles tried to find him. He sent his driver to the park, to the shelters, to the usual corners. But Malcolm was gone. Winter rolled in, and the days grew colder. Then, one morning, as Charles walked past the park himself, he saw a small crowd gathered near the fountain. In the center, A police officer was covering something with a blanket. A familiar old guitar leaned against the bench. Charles froze. He pushed through the crowd, but when he saw the body beneath the blanket, his chest went numb. The officer said the man had been found early that morning. Exposure, maybe pneumonia. No ID. Just a torn photograph of a boy tucked inside his coat. Charles didn't hear the rest. He just stood there, staring at the lifeless form of the man who had given his daughter back her laughter. When he returned home, Emily saw his face and instantly knew. She didn't cry right away. She just whispered, "He promised he'd sing for me again." Charles knelt beside her and pulled her close. For the first time in his life, he couldn't find a single word to make things better. Outside, snow began to fall, and in the distance, it felt like the city itself was holding its breath. The estate was silent, the kind of silence that presses against the walls and makes every footstep sound like an echo from another life. Emily sat by the window, her wheelchair turned toward the falling snow, staring at the gray sky as if trying to will him back. Charles sat beside her, his hand gripping hers tightly. For the first time, he couldn't fix things with money, influence, or control. Nothing he had could bring back the man who had changed everything in just a few days. "He's gone, Emily," Charles said softly. Her eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head. "No, Daddy, he's not gone. He's still here." Charles blinked, confused. "Where?" "In the music," she whispered. "In the songs he sang, in the way he made me laugh. That's how I'll always remember him." She reached for the small music box Charles had given her for Christmas. It had a soft, tinny tune, but when she wound it and let it play, the melody reminded her of Malcolm's raspy voice, the sound of the guitar, the laughter in the rain. Charles watched her closely. He realized something important. Malcolm's gift wasn't just for Emily. It had reminded Charles himself of something he had forgotten: how to care without calculation, how to love without protection, how to see joy in the smallest moments. That evening, Charles made a decision. He would honor Malcolm's memory not with wealth or monuments, but by living differently, by teaching Emily and perhaps even himself to carry forward that honesty and freedom. Over the next weeks, they transformed the mansion's little music room. Pianos, guitars, even a second-hand saxophone Malcolm had once used were placed carefully in the corner. Emily began learning to play, her small fingers following the rhythms Malcolm had taught her. Every note she struck was a reminder of him. Charles began volunteering at shelters in the city, quietly, anonymously, giving opportunities to musicians and street performers who reminded him of Malcolm, people the world overlooked, just like the man who had given his daughter back her laughter. One snowy afternoon, Emily and Charles went back to the park where Malcolm had first played. They brought flowers, laying them gently by the fountain where he had been last seen. Emily knelt beside them, whispering softly, "Thank you for making me laugh, for singing with me, for showing me that happiness is worth holding on to." Charles put his arm around her. "He changed both of us, didn't he?" Emily nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks, but a small, genuine smile breaking through. "Yes, and I'll never forget him." From that day on, whenever Emily played the songs Malcolm had taught her, Charles listened quietly from the doorway, realizing that sometimes the smallest, most unexpected people leave the biggest marks. Malcolm had come into their lives as a stranger from the streets, a man with nothing but a song and a heart full of care. And though he was gone, his gift, the joy, the laughter, the courage to feel, remained. The snow fell heavier now, covering the city in quiet white. Inside the Bennett mansion, the piano hummed softly, Emily's fingers dancing across the keys. Outside, the streets held their secrets, and somewhere, unseen, the echoes of a raspy guitar and a raspy voice lingered in the air. It was a reminder that even in loss, the music never truly dies. And in that music, Malcolm lived forever.